Chapter 5, The Jewish Sacrificial System Reinstituted. A run-through. As with the implications, several options brought to mind the simple adage that you can verily satisfy a plethora of persons only when stopping short of pleasing all. The option that seemed to have won, catering to the religious concerns, felt like detailing items of global import from a political blueprint, not coincidentally. The temple, years and years of planning from the temple faithful and such groups long favoring initiative to erect a third Jewish temple, had given way to plans for an encase-all-dome type of construct. The quip made by one media guy endured easily enough, and he said that perhaps this same architect ought to be brought in for questioning to see if he had blueprints ahead of time staining his fingers. Pertaining to Temple Mount, a calm attached to a sort of ambitious initiative had set in after the Temple Mount was redesigned on paper to facilitate such a mega complex. And whether you be a rabbinical scholar, rabbi of the Orthodox or Reformed cloth, or of persons whose spiritual needs were seen to beg the conclusion, well, lo and behold, what had felt like perfectly overlaying transparency sheets beneath the screen's projector matching with what Christians of all sorts were convinced of had, of its own accord, seemed to unfold and materialize. 'Twas a miracle of inscrutable proportionality, as though having an intent perfectly agreeing with espoused components, with one Nasser Abu Mata Hussein's inference, that seemed to be ever be wed to ad nauseum innuendo only until the suspicion was demoted by shades of reality that you could easily turn a blind eye to only by burying your head in the sand, opined one of today's on-site correspondents. While hearing only a portion of our story thus far, people could be pardoned for concluding that the aforementioned three might be referring to a third world engagement going by the moniker World War III, when the truth is that here we do speak of a matter to directly address in multi-faith concerns that details were conspicuous for an all-inclusion Temple Mount worship factor unique in respective worship styles that the same could facilitate at this time. Yes, even in this world, the men and women couldn't in one of Earth's great miraculous unfold that itself, if given shape and physical dimensionality, might one day soon be referred to as another world marvel. Given the history and context of interfaith wrangling here, it was quite impossible to encounter naivete though, while speaking of such an initiative that still had plenty of time to spell drama for the Middle East climate, and God only knows where else. Truthfully, the initiative had been planned for committee persons taking charge whose actions felt actionable unto realization in their hopes of erecting the Third Temple's grand complex over top of the Jewish Temple, Muslim and Christian Quarter, and Temple Mount region. For so long, was it far from easy to consider any component as a wheel given to the initiative that would seem to, only on a gear system, beg for an oiling feeling like the insertion of only liquefied rust until the idea met with feasibility that all faiths could feel where the matter of heart really was in terms of committing to a heart of worship. The new temple then, the words spoken by altruistic persons doggedly investing life and resources unto her causes were heard. Turns out she, not the temple but the all-surround complex as a hood, as 'twere, for structures accommodating all faith, turns out she verily could potentially be, viewed as major sudden accomplishment, although caught by challenges of a generation with relations still were in vulnerable flux, out of which was birthday's reality. 'Twas Prime Minister Itzhak Rosen speaking to the media, continuing, facilitating new structure plans without disregard for those structures as symbols of faith and worship that were ever left to stand throughout short history. The structures so important to individuals' faithful expression could verily be engrafted into any design of this new structure as a multiplex dome or encased area presenting the Temple Mount in an even more prestigious light, as was the Temple Mount ever a centering platform seen as foundation inside of which respective individual worship modes could still ever be respectfully honored. The Prime Minister had concluded on the day of the mock sacrifice ceremony with representatives from several faiths in attendance who were eager to meet in front of the several cameras dotting the premises. The question was too soon finding its answer for persons daring to ask the question, how soon after the Jewish temple's erecting shall it be fraught by fierce opponents to what the peace-loving worshippers do really desire? Persons with a fixed conclusion determined ahead of time, while imagining that they might hear the question posed in two different ways when hearing what felt to them like a bona fide threat, whereas others would maintain that these temple antagonists were on hell's fires, bent to present themselves as a threat regardless of concessions or sense of diplomatic appeasement. Do you prefer a third temple or a third world war? 'Twas as before Third Temple's erecting, ouch and oiva at once. Dear readers, let us begin to present their opinions, continuing with this man's thread unto the several narratives. How dare these ones think this thing? Only by action would they seem to ever be determined to give voice to the daring voicing of presentiments, whereas other persons, unscrupulous operatives from less savory aspects of baneful consequence and society, they heard something ringing of dire opportunity, convinced that with scarcely a thing generating a desired result that was conscientiously maintained and left unshorn, why shouldn't we in fact dignify only this counter-logic thing that's any failing couldn't fuel the flames of conquest the more, or, could lead to less contention if not total resolve. Desperate times meeting with feelings of desperation that could still yield an auspicious gamble paying off, or again, something about unspoken consensus revivified on wings of demonstrated resistance that, with time, does only portend desperation's conclusion. The elements rife with interglobal conquest suddenly teeming with laudable prospects in minds bent on gamble, only were bewed to withstand certain ideas of sleepless risk that ever remained, and for the sake of realizing risk's reward should such from off of the pages of theorizing arising for a predetermined time do so, impervious to stagnancy's nurturing. Now the affectionately termed idiot back east USA on his radio show had his opinion to share that was conspicuous for how it sounded more like fact than opinion, as if from the future seeing transpiration, and while traveling back to the past to share it and seeming to come down with a case of amnesia, said he two things at least. Oh, the erecting of the temple all surround complex is found suddenly amenable to opposition teams because they have the plan to utilize such as launching ground for a most egregious transpiration down the line. And thus opened he up the basement phones to a flood of calls before adding another opinion that was unto a contradictory mood when exclaiming, oh, that they would cleverly diversify their targeting eyes, so to speak, and put the likely target on the move and oust any likelihood that the new temple could be impacted while leaving ungrazed this time the newly erected version of Al-Sharif, translated Al-Aqsa Mosque, ever taking it good-naturedly when his callers on the other end of his welcoming then to the show habitually started with, "Ya village idiot, listen here," or, "Sometimes takes a village and sometimes takes an idiot, I guess, and where we have the two together, ... As would any idiot conclude, so do you in like fashion conclude by yada 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 etc etc etc, and he had yet another opinion of elucidating consideration affixed to one maintained to share with an official confidential host sources who'd remain off the air with him. With solemn features inscribed in features on this day, starting out as informal as leaders involved, warmly trade salutes and extend salutations among themselves, and then with the air of dignified stewardship with which they as liaison force purpose to meet and greet attendees, visitors and worshippers to excitedly on the other side of the inside temple and its partitioning, that itself reminded of distinctiveness and unity instead of dissolution of custom, where they would acclimate themselves to the cessation of differences as though triggered by one mighty event. In the spirit of the same, folks extend their customary greetings while making new acquaintances as key personages finally send the message that they were ready to commence events when they'd lined up with clasped hands beneath the frontal waist, remaining silent when turning to face the people straight away. The atmosphere was like the weather, both sent and approved of by Providence. 'Twas said, with the disposition sweet and simply referred to by the Imam as inward and amicable, unshakable, and as was a fabric unshorn for those wishing to in opening event ceremony behold the heavily publicized event. Maybe the best weather is a gift with a dignified air, cool and crisp yet tolerable as the sun atop rare and unseasonable snow in Jerusalem conspires to tinge objects with a pinkish haze coloring the trusted leaders here the more dignified as rabbi, imam, Armenian priest, and Christian bishop, lauded the two men who were the most vocal leaders with the broadest influence regarding the ambitious plan for talks that was hoped to be unto peace's restoration. In tandem with the work of the Prime Minister amid a difficult climate and his team of ambassadors appointed by God as very persons, from Israeli Prime Minister Rosen's vantage point, entrusted to revive the palpable impression of the new day by into the distant past and recesses sweeping in unfortunate time the inauspicious circumstances of age-old rift and exasperating squabbles, a sigh of relief was breathed as the recent local climate seemed to serve as that which colored the world attire in a shade of congenial here, and the air of esteem by prestigious ones attending had marked the event as all the more hallowed and required for the propagation of the world peace idea, sending the message that, quote-unquote, with Imam quoting, "Peace in our most trying time ever could very well soon, we shall see, it could very well soon be demonstrated as possible." The men and women added that theirs was the generation to accomplish the legacy of what was believed to lead to the next stage of enlightenment ordained by the very God believed to have ordered the same. Distinction pointing to the men of the hour who'd stood by as witnesses to the signing of convention letters for the sake of seeing a treaty of peace with Padre Piotr Drom Danus, dressed in full papal attire, and a turbaned Nasser Abu Mata Hussein, laying aside his military garb. Similarly, in long flowing robes, by virtue of their affiliation, they were themselves symbolic of the universal brotherhood idea set to flourish. The two men were seen as holy and in their parts instrumental only where both were received by so many persons as venerable, it was said. Proud and smiling, they beamed while looking on as regional elect officials who were pledged to impartiality, and speaking of their hopes to instill what would befriend a climate of promise through their ambitious initiative. So inviolably pristine, the pearlescent color of that freshly fallen snow as self-containing wonder herself, a trace of it here along the lines of the perimeter and centering the newly refurbished dome of the rock structure sporting beard and tresses in what seems to somehow assign the undertaking as preordained in the original dome that's reconstruction atop pillars, the decided upon action for the basic non-incorporated structure alongside Jewish temples erecting was underway, still respectfully set apart within its own cement encasing for those who otherwise see her as an indispensable preservation symbol, and for whom community worship ideas were entrenched into the very fabric impervious to a disintegrating. Still, some participants believed that the dissolution of what had always before felt like a travesty repeated, and the dissolution of custom. What had changed or was to ideally soon change was that from either quarter, with respect to three world religions and worshippers acknowledging Abraham as the loyal father of the faith, accessibility within the respective sections would be open to all as the intimation from individual quarters planning zones did already visually attest. So bold was initiative for the add-on project that the grand occasion that was the erecting of a third temple in Jerusalem Jerusalem was seen as something other than the monumental marvel that it truly was. Marvel compounded atop of marvel, add on a certain discovery to ignite the debate thereabouts surrounding. And somehow, to an extent, intermingling was encouraged by the ones gathering in the new structure from outside the threshold and hall to the inner sanctuary of gathering place to worship. So, lots had changed already where people with hearts of worship did wish to reasonably maintain autonomy. Many of differing ages and roles found acceptable the entire all-surround package with chalk fresh still on the blueprints and engineers' architects' boards earmarking the characteristic events as most serving and acceptable, if for no other reason than that people should together aspire to, as spoke in the initiative, endorse what should address worldwide hostility with this Mideast Peace Initiative as a wheel. Several imams on location as Muslim prayer leaders proficient in Islamic law alongside the ulama who'd gathered to greet his assembly, reluctant to refute charges of terroristic activity involvement allegation, and then provided insight gleaned from the former, speaking among themselves and later on the hour to come, when should Jewish sacrifice ceremonies required of this day and the Feast of Atonement be telecast to eager crowds hoping to vicariously share in festivities, and for the Muslim and Christian communities whose vicarious sojourn to these regions via telecast felt like the stuff of impossible fantasy, as the comments from the leaders assembled in Jerusalem attested. Hebrew and Arabic versions were translated into other languages for the camera lens and various feeds, with sign language specialists pantomiming for the throngs gathering worldwide. Together we agree that something somewhere has as though universally changed. The imam dressed like the Ayatollah with open palms raised skyward echoed while speaking to assembled individuals gathering shortly before the ram's horn was to sound. From inside, the temple approached the outside Muslim quarter with the far-extending shared roof construction framework, yet extended over the top of its designated quarter. The familiar dome inside appropriately and succinctly said to soon resemble a kind of a dome within a cathedral inside a temple, if all goes as planned, accessible only while inside of the greater and all-surrounding dome. Yes, undoubtedly the feeling is that already something has changed. Yes, universally, externally, and then inwardly. This isn't denied by anyone who worships here. With changes and additions of a sort to surround all structures erecting, pertaining to my faith, under the spearheading and headship of our imam and ulama as spiritual leaders world around, these do, as political authorities, behold the result in the fine work of Padre Piotr and Ambassador Nasser Hussein here in Jerusalem. Both men, the world knows, should one day be most instrumental in the peace initiative where there remains only discord still and more hostilities and Temple Mount troubles than before, and persons to soon no longer squabble over land do now squabble over what nation should spearhead the sponsorship designation in any motion to consecrate kingship. When shall Nasser be referred to by us as King Nasser Hussein? A true peacemaker, yes, only informally spoken of by us today. A reporter on scene asked, do you credit any others with encouraging this avant-garde brokering of peace? Or do you see this as simply the accomplishment of these two men representing the political and religious sectors in the eastern countries and beyond? It was our responsibility, all of us, we decided, to make the motion to mend the rift through our prayers to Allah, and the occasion presenting itself finally now in what world's armies making way back to their families cannot resist. And with the ascension of these men, the nations would seem to begin to welcome a universal, even desperate, unifying that mere talking about hadn't so richly touched as they do now. Further, we see it as though a gift from and to Allah that day when they, I mean Jews, have discovered their Ark of the Testimony, as called such, but not without grounds underneath it, as the media know and share with you how it extends on the outside portions of boundary lines of both Jewish and Muslim sections, with large arrows pointing towards it as if we were expected to finally find it, designating the stop area drawn beneath the Temple Mount and a slab of rock beneath the basement of the Dome of the Rock. We are all as characters inside of a movie and are quite enthralled. The man whose salt and pepper beard with flecks of snowflake landing therein with winds tossing grays against his golden sash grew excitable. It is like this, he began to illustrate when holding his outstretched arm from the outside of his robe parallel to the ground as if he were through gesture indicating an individual's height, then began to use his wrist as hinging fulcrum as it were parallel to the ground. I make the bridge with my hand for you and the camera to see, like a seesaw. Say the arc is it, tip it too far this way, his fingers raised upwards some. And the bridge, or the ark, let's say, it falls this way and tips it too far from the other direction. It is too weighty for any of us to lay claim to it unless we all do, given such particulars of this discovery. It is like Allah laments and shares a tear with us over the targeting of the dome on the former 42 pillars impacted and set ablaze and decides to send us, or them, this ark. As you see, we can't do away with her pertaining to that which stood atop of same pillars, which isn't to say we should resist any encasing of the greater edifice surrounding her under the appearance of a guardian-type role, yes? He lowered his arm, traded glances between the reporter and the bustling crowd, and gazed speedily toward the camera. We decided now to use their discovery to encourage peace, parenthetically to break from his initial train of thought to buttress the notion supporting conclusion. I mean the Jews who were the very first ones to put out the dome's pillar flames after she was struck by a missile. Under Nasser's advice and Piotr de Rome as head prophets of Islam and the Christian faith, we argue that the reason sometimes for the feeling of change, as I described before, is maybe because we already demand it and demand that it should meet with a change in here. With a set of fingers he tap against his chest at heart region, in the heart. Something like this. I think Nasser and their prophet or pope said in front of the crowds that onward change should be attached to some significant demonstrated thing that, like with the position of the ark, we think does serve as a sign for more than the Jews, saying that the outward sign is strengthened for the sake of, because of, the inward sign and reminding us of it. Some in our religion and on all sides argue, regarding the miraculous feeling of a return of peace could soon arrive here and abroad, that a symbol outwardly displayed is required as a sort of glue, especially if the appearance, he stressed, I repeat the appearance, and through a gesture and an extended forefinger held out in front of him, he'd colored the noun as distinctive and critical. Is that we don't desire peace when most of us, I think, don't want the political wars to continue to lead to religious ones any further. So profound is the miracle that we think it would take a miracle to reverse the progress empowered by the initiatives of brave men. Maybe you fully know, the pillars to our third most holy site bombed, nobody does specifically take responsibility for, and given the allegations, we who live here in this region cannot really speak for the few, and to ask, can you speak against it? Respectfully, our segment short, interjected the reporter. An act for which the perpetrators still could be detected from one group, as suspected by authorities, and who can finally be brought to account. Can you speak to this, condemn it, or even speak of whose claims responsibility and discloses any certain name from a group sought out by authorities, in the way of verifying the same? To condemn it? He trailed on a vocal upswing as if asked the real unwieldy tangle of enigmatic questions, the uneasiness wobbly and evidenced in his shifting eyes and dancing Adam's apple in the throat. But beyond that, maybe for a later discussion. That's all I wish to speak for today. Thank you very much for your time. I think that is for something for the greater minds than mine to decide, as I do not wish to trouble the waters. His uneasy smile and succession of bows with each step were taken backward and away from the reporter and her camera as he nodded respectfully, his forehead tipped forward, waving while acknowledging a gesture aimed toward her that signified heartfelt gratitude, as he gently closed his eyes and turned to signal the others to in customary order join him. He walked away and toward the gate leading to the dome opening to the partition welcoming unto its sector. The reporter shared again on camera. The dome is an object inside of the temple with the largest portion of Temple Mount as temple grounds, a real marvel to behold as even before the complex meets with full construction, she retains her stately appeal with the external scarcely appearing like a university or museum ground, but a heralding threshold, my friends, a dynamic particular to the hour with unresolved questions existing still. The dark-complected man with the golden sash over his shoulder matching the rope dangling from his waist and with braided rope securing there turned around while backpedaling to say, Ambassador Hussein, alongside Christian prophet Piotr de Rome, as world calls him, I think these have already addressed the terrible crime and issue, and I remind that Allah sees all and is the judge of such. Thank you again very much again. The news reporter was bumped into by children scurrying about with speeding multi-directional hingeless wheels for feet, leading her to uncomfortably ask while she stood only awkwardly straight after struggling to recover balance, oh my, the little ones. And what do you think of the Jewish sacrifice ceremony? The giddy and evasively shy children with interchangeable limbs are rolling and the woman with them sporting the draping black hijab. They simply looked on for a long second before a vague word sharing and squaring her shoulders, she looked to the camera and finally waved to it, caught between wishing to share her sentiments worldwide and suddenly growing reticent, then coy beyond recovery. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. The bridge, she mimicked the imam's hand motion sign for the second time, between two religions, or three, and the discovered ark in the shared discovery underground beneath the supports and support moorings leading to this miracle. We believe that for the first time in 2,000 years or more, this stupendous marvel might be referred to by a future generation as another world marvel for history's recording amid a climate that portended World War III. The question remains, will the increased desire for four-fronted peace last this time? Yes. Who cannot agree with the man that the world is rife with the external elements of captivating rearrangement? And just maybe, she emphasized with animated insertion unto greater emphasis, for effect pausing before breaking with glowing, and with elation apparent when she grew overly conscious of a lump in her throat as she swallowed. Just maybe the external shall transmute to true and lasting resolve and even stimulate interaction. A good omen instead of a doom-portending harbinger. Let us pray that the naysayers are incorrect with their grim prophecies. With events soon underway, let me just say in conclusion that the religion topic outside of the parameters of this discussion, or broadcast of the sacrifice and ceremony event, its unsettling commentary will have to wait for another day. Thank you for joining us, folks. We'll have more later this evening, so do tune in.